Okay, I think, here we go. All right. These natural sounds that you're hearing that you're not used to here on the show this week, we're doing this sort of, I guess, homage to natural cinema of the '60s, right? We're immersed in our natural homes and environments. Welcome to After Wednesday episode Getting Literary with the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. I'm your host, Jeffrey Hayes, contributing writer to CapelessCrusader.org. Speaking of CapelessCrusader.org, little plug here, which, why don't you head on over there at some point. CapelessCrusader.org is your home for entertaining and thoughtful reviews, opinions, and commentary on the comic genre. And I, of course, in the last few years have written for them. So if you just want to read my articles and just that, then I'm not going to complain. Just make sure you +1 it or, whatever the youth is doing. There's so much to keep up with Pinterests and +1s and all of this. And if you like what you see there, or maybe you think that it's a little bit too heady for me, head on over to the Crusaders Brothers site, fanboysinc.com. DW and the crew over at FBI keep you up to date on comics entertainment through reviews, articles, and a network of FBI podcasts each week. So please check those out. For those of you who might not know, the topic for this week's show is the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. This is a series that is now a multi-decade comic by veterans Alan Moore, this rather dapper gentleman here, looking very distinguished on the BBC, by the way. I love this photo of him because it makes him look so soft and vulnerable when he's obviously not, anyone who knows him. And then the hardcore Kevin O'Neill. Artist extraordinaire. The League is Moore and O'Neill's take on some classic Victorian literary characters, adapting them to fit sort of a blended sensibility of science hero, fantasy, steampunk music, and pop culture commentary, done with such a degree of esoteria that there are actually annotated compendiums to the series. So what is it about this series exactly? Here to help me out in talking about the League this week is a longtime Alan Moore reader, and in my opinion, fantastic critic, Mr. Heath Pecorino. Good evening, sir. Thank you for taking time out to talk to me.
Absolutely, sir. Thank you so much for having me on.
So the League, we just are going to try to walk it through because we're celebrating, last week they released the hardcover collection of the last Century books, the 3 books that ended up making up Century. So I thought it would be a good time to sort of bring people up to speed about the League if they were unfamiliar with it, or give people really a chance to sort of talk about it or even revisit it, because I'm sort of mystified when I think about the League and Alan Moore's canon as to its popularity. Like it's kind of hard to put my finger on over the evolution of the series, and how did you come to find the book originally?
Well, it came out with his when he went back to comics after a hiatus. He retired for a while. I think the only thing he was doing was issuing a couple of books of From Hell, and he might have come out with something, 2 or 3 other books. I guess the only thing that was actually done during that period was stuff by Eddie Campbell, or with Eddie Campbell, and that would be obviously From Hell, and then the whole Disease of Language stuff that Eddie Campbell adapted from his performance pieces.
Right.
And he had left the whole scene because, well, he got fed up with it, and he's a little bit testy anyway. So, and he turned 40 and wanted to climb on top of a mountain and eat mushrooms for years.
Who doesn't?
So, yeah, exactly. Midlife crisis. But eventually he came back. He decided I guess he had one of those David Lynch inspirational moments where he just said, I have to make a comic book. but he said it in a much more deeper and slower tone than
Right.
um, and then and so then he came out with America's Best Comics, and this was all part of that line.
Mhm.
Uh,
Now that was the comic line that he had to deal with at the time, DC slash Wildstorm slash Vertigo slash whoever was running the show at the time.
well, it was done through Wildstorm, which was at the time Jim Lee's Image company. You know, Image is divided into companies in and of themselves. Um, I guess he had done a couple issues of Wildcats with Jim Lee. Really enjoyed working with him on
Oh
it.
yeah, that's right. I forgot about that.
I've never read those, you know, and maybe that Mr. Majestic story came out probably through the same line. But the story is that Jim Lee called him up and told him, "Look, I've got some bad news. Um, DC just bought us out. Um, are you still okay with us issuing it through them?" And ultimately, he decided that yes, he was okay. I don't know how the rights worked out for everything,
Uh-huh.
um, because obviously, League of Extraordinary Gentlemen has moved on to Top Shelf.
Yes.
Um, but at the time, he decided that he was okay with it as long as the advertisements for everything that they put into it were put at the end of the books.
Like your typical, Bubblicious ad or hot
Yeah,
dog ad or
yeah,
all.
yeah. It's all video games now, anyway, man. It's
or
all
like
video.
cross or
Yeah.
like cross-reference DC products,
Right.
like
Exactly.
those really strange homoerotic arrow ads.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Seriously, like I've never been able to wrap my head around that. Like I've just been like, okay, yeah, buff guys, these guys are in good shape. Like I get it, but like,
Dude, dude, there are things that guy does that make me want to work out. I won't, but man, yeah.
yeah. So this series comes out. I believe it was 99,
Yep.
99 2000,
Yep.
and it's kind of strange because to me, how do you make basically an opium addict, a widow, a monster, a captain, and a psychopath really intriguing? What's what was your take on when you read the first volume of it?
um, I read it piecemeal first
Mhm.
because, funny enough, I had totally stepped away from comics, and I met a friend who was like, "Oh, you were into comics," and I was like, "Yes." This was back during that post college, like, I'm such an artist. I don't comic books anymore. And
Right.
honestly, in my defense, the '90s comics kind of sucked, except for Alan Moore.
Right,
Um,
right. Thank you. Well, Grant Morrison's around.
yeah,
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 yeah.
yeah, yeah. There were definitely a couple of real high points, but I mean, for the most part, most of the commercial stuff that you were reading, it sucked. There was no reason to go into the store. That's why the industry almost died. So when this friend of mine tells me that Alan Moore has just come out with 6 new series
Yeah.
that are being published concurrently, um, and eventually, obviously, those deadlines got a little blurry. Didn't matter
Right,
so much
right.
anymore. But all of a sudden, I had to jump right back in, and
Hmm.
that's the whole reason that I got back into comics at all,
Hmm.
was because of those series. I picked up Tom Strong and was like, "This is awesome."
Yeah,
Uh,
and I think that happened too, sort of, uh, for you. You kind of brought me along at that point too. We did it concurrently because I remember we um, went to a shop and you had me. You basically I'd read the League and really liked it, and you
uh,
said I remember I bought the first hardcover edition of Tom Strong.
Yeah.
that day, and you were just like, dude, this is, this is top notch. And I was just like, oh, all right. And sure enough, it really, really was.
Yeah.
And I like to think of, I'm bringing up right now a picture by Alex Ross of his interpretation of the League. I love
Wow.
that Alec Baldwin's.
Yeah, obviously.
Yeah, and it looks like Tracy Morgan. Oh, you know what this is? It just hit me. It's a 40 Rock thing, a 30 Rock thing. That's right.
That's hilarious. It is. It's
And,
totally 30 Rock.
Yeah, yeah, and
It's got a thing. That's great. That's great.
yeah, yeah. I think it's. But to me, it sort of captures this idea for how I felt when I read the first volume of the League, and a little bit of the second was that there's and really the whole ABC line initially is joy. There's just happiness
Right.
about it, and it just feels good. And I mean, because previously the last thing by Moore I had read was From Hell, which good lord, you just you get bogged down in that, and you're
Right.
it's fascinating and it's beautiful and it's intriguing, but it just takes you to such a dark corner.
Yeah.
So it was nice. It was nice to sort of bounce back. But I also want to bounce back up here for a moment because there's this wonderful quote by Moore. He says, "Life isn't divided into genres. It's a horrifying, romantic, tragic, comical, science fiction, cowboy, detective novel." Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that my amazing, wonderful wife found that on a magnet for me to put at work.
Nice.
Yeah. Yeah,
I think to me this sort of encapsulates again that idea of and the cover fits because it's all the ABC stuff too, as well as some earlier work, or all his work. But I think it sort of encapsulates the idea that it was fun. It could be there was a sense of adventure, and Promethea and Tom Strong, those are wholly separate shows. I'm not even going to get into all that, but that first League book really was quite a jumping off point, and as it got into the second volume, I felt at least there began to be a bit of a change in tone.
Tremendous. Yeah, totally agree.
What do you think? What was the contributing factor to that?
You mean in his? What are some years around this? Because this is going to be.
I'm going to say it's 0102, because wasn't there a break between Volume 1 and Volume 2 starting?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I can't think of anything going on in his personal life that would have been particularly bad.
Yeah.
But I think that you're absolutely right. This second book is actually, besides Century, probably my least favorite. It's got a couple of great things going on in it, but it absolutely takes a much harsher tone with everything that happens. I don't know how many spoilers I can give away in this, but everything that happens with Griffin and Hyde, what happens to Madame Murray.
Mm-hmm.
These are characters that you absolutely love, and just the whole debacle. There's a bit of wonderful humor for a second inside of it when Nemo says these people are only ellipsis, and I think Hyde's like, what, human? And he says English.
Yes. Let me break your thought off there. We have a question from your lovely other. She asks you, can you speak detail on Paul Levitz's recall of issue 5 in the second 6-issue series?
Okay, I believe that I know nothing about that. Obviously,
that
obviously, she is doing much more research than I am at this point in time because she's brilliant. She's that good.
yeah.
Um, but if I were to guess, there is a horrible, horrible rape scene that occurs.
Yes.
And if a book had to be recalled out of this series, I'm guessing it was that issue.
Yeah.
Um,
Was it also wasn't there an ad for like a Victorian douche
yes.
also if I remember correctly?
Yes, you're right. You're right. Maybe that's what it was.
Maybe. Well, rape and that's for DC. That's basically a death knell.
Right. Right. Right.
which is odd, but for people who haven't read the second volume, the first volume basically dealt with Sherlock Holmes's nemesis. I don't want to give too much away, but it deals with that, and then in the second volume takes an H.G. Wells turn, as you can tell by this cover that I have up right now. Actually, I think there's a teaser at the end of the last issue of the first volume, isn't there, where the meteors, falling to Earth, and then at the beginning of the second volume you have this really nice John Carter opening.
Absolutely.
That goes on and on actually for quite a bit. It was more really first testing me with languages and what he'll do later in the most recent Nemo book, which I know you didn't read, but in the most recent Nemo book, Rose of Berlin, so much of it is in German. It's amazing.
That's great. I think that's absolutely perfect when he does that. And he did that in Big Numbers. That was the first time I had seen him do that. But yes, he did that. He did that in the first volume as well when they were speaking Chinese.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
I'm curious about the Martian language because I was just reading about how Philip K. Dick was when he was starting Man in the High Castle, he was toying around with the idea of a Martian language. I'm wondering if they're one and the same. That'd be something to check out.
Yeah, yeah. There's also in the second volume too. I think that it's interesting how, like we said, this really dark turn comes in. He really puts everything, it seems, on the line, as if this will be the last books.
Maybe that's the idea, Maybe he's going back to old school literary ideas, and then in the second one you want it to have a big catastrophic break.
Yeah.
Empire Strikes Back and all that.
Yeah, I think it's interesting though because you have such a strange resolution, for instance, between the triumvirate of Hyde, Mina, and the Invisible Man.
Right.
Yeah, and again, I don't want to give anything away, but it's quite shocking. But you know what? It's handled with extraordinary tenderness. Like initially, where he has that great moment with Mina, where he's like, I think he says something like, "May I touch you?"
Yes.
And it's such.
Yes.
Go ahead.
It's not quite May. He asks if he can touch her breast.
Yes.
And it's coming from a place where you're absolutely right. There is a tenderness to it. There is obviously a sexuality to it. But at the same point in time, this is coming from the most monstrous thing you can imagine. Yeah. That the only person that it respects on the planet is her.
Yes.
It is very clear that everybody else can just,
fuck off. Yeah.
Fuck off.
Yeah.
I can say that here.
Yes. You're free reign to say whatever you want.
Yay, America!
Yay.
But at the same point in time, but yeah, absolutely at that moment, he's just saying, and by the way, really dig you.
Yeah. Yeah, I've always, it's weird over the years. I've kind of always gone back to that movie, and credit to Kevin O'Neill too, because the panels are done and there's a really just such a small subtlety in the way he draws Hyde relishing the moment.
Yeah.
Like in his face. And I think he even goes something like, lovely. Like that, like it's such a strange of all the images in the first 2 volumes, you know what I mean? Like that image has always sort of stuck with me. And that's an attribute to me of like Moore's ability of weirdness he can hold over you to make you think of such strange moments, you know, and really sort of burn them into your brain. So with these first 2 volumes, let me ask you then, what do you think personally? Had you read any of the background literature, any of the Victorian books that most of this was pretty much based on?
Good Lord. Most of it, no. Things would crop up here and there. I remember, the only reason I know Alan Quatermain, dude, is because you and I used to watch King Solomon's Mines in the 80s.
Oh, so awful.
Yeah. That's the only reason why I know that name.
Yes.
Mina Murray, I couldn't have told you. I read about it somewhere. Jekyll and Hyde, I probably read a kid's book about it.
Mm-hmm.
Invisible Man, never read a story. Vaguely knew about it because of a library book that had a mention. It was a library book about 50s horror movies, so I knew about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, nothing going into it.
Which has always sort of made me curious, because I know that he chooses things, it seems, at random, but this just seems really calculated as far as he sort of knew that these characters were somehow embedded in our pop culture subconscious,
Absolutely.
Even if we had never read a page of it. Like, and I don't know how much I should attribute of genius to that, but I mean, you know, I'm just curious because I mean, I have an English degree and I didn't read most of those Victorian books.
Right.
I read them much later, and I was completely in. Like, I felt like I knew these people, you know, 3 issues in.
Do you think that's because they're essentially archetypes?
Yes. Yes, yeah. Absolutely. He found that way. To me, he took his training and his knowledge of superhero archetypes that he had worked with, and has such a good understanding of those that I guess he just basically, you know, transposed that and said, well, shit, if it can work for Superman, it could work for Alan Quatermain, and it did.
Yeah, absolutely.
Your lovely other has another question here.
Okay.
She asks, the second volume possesses an extensive index entitled The New Traveler's Almanac, which has gained its own noteworthy status due to the staggering amount of detail and historic references. Can you speak of this in more detail?
The almanac that is at the end, it is not part of the Bumper Compendium edition, I believe, which was issued with Singular Issues. It's only part of the trade paperback. It's brilliant. It took me... I actually didn't read it for a long time because, you know, words. Man, I'm all about pictures. But then one day I had 5 hours to kill at a coffee shop. And literally, like it was a Sunday. There was nothing going on. Nobody was there. I had my coffee. I had my book. And was finally like, why not? Why not just dive in? It's really tiny text. It's going to be hard to read. Go for it. And it was amazing. Some of that I absolutely did recognize. In fact, there was one bit that was really brilliant. You know, the idea is that situations in the second volume turned so bad that some of the league has just decided to maybe take some time off, do their own
Yeah.
thing. Um, and that is, of course, Mina Murray. And it's her story of journeying around the world, uncovering all of these wonderful little places and objects and people and things that are all attributed to some sort of literary fanfare.
Right.
And I say literary fanfare, but the one thing that absolutely sticks out in my mind is when she happens to mention traveling to somewhere in a strange little place in in the state of Washington. Well, I don't know. I don't believe it was the current state of Washington at the time. It must have been the Northwest Pacific Territory.
Uh-huh.
And all I remember, I think she vaguely mentioned something about carvings of owls and a black and white lodge.
This is the first reference I think to the Dunwich Horror.
No, it's to Twin Peaks.
Oh, it is. That's right. It is. I'm sorry, I got the Northeast and the West mixed up.
No, it's okay. No, that reference like blew my mind, and it's practically a footnote. It's so small, but it was like, oh, thank you, Alan Moore, for mentioning something that I remember, because I haven't read the other stuff.
Yeah. But he does get around to in the of course the compendiums grow much longer.
Well, one thing should be noted also about the almanac is that
Yeah.
it contains story information which may be considered intrinsic to the things that occur in the Black Dossier.
Right, which is where we're heading here next.
Right.
So after the events of Volume 2, we have the band disbands.
Right.
And we don't even know if we're going to get another League book. And knowing his attitudes about things, he has a big fallout with DC and with American publishing in general. He says it's shit. We're done. I'm never going to do it again.
Right.
And then here comes this. Some years pass, and here comes this this book, and it's so dense, so heavy.
It's a tome for such a slender volume. Oh my God!
It has so much. I mean, it jumps. The tone of the book jumps so much. We've got from the primary, it's taking place in the 1950s in the Cold War area. This example I've got up here, things are very gray, they're dark.
Yeah.
James Bond is a complete prick.
Exactly, like he would be.
Well, just like he would be. So now we're getting into middle century, and things are just looking bad. We've got the Tijuana Bibles in there.
Right. I forgot about that.
Yeah, this book here, which of course is the porn sect, obvious reference to Orwell in 1984, as is really the whole design of this particular Tijuana Bible is.
Absolutely.
And then you get through to the absolute weirdness of bringing in Prospero from The Tempest and making the book 3D.
Yes.
In the end, I mean, what the hell? You sat back. I just remember I had a headache.
Yeah.
After it took me 2 weeks, and I had such a headache after it, and I didn't understand anything. Like I walked away from it, and I was confused. What was your feelings while you were trying to get through it?
I read it in probably 2 really heady days.
Oh wow.
Yeah. I did okay with it. at the time, I was hanging out with this friend of mine who was reading it as well, and he's kind of got a little touch of the Asperger's going
Uh,
on.
okay.
So he has read almost everything that's mentioned through the League books, right?
Yeah.
And um, there are things that pop out in that Black Dossier that I would not have known because of him. For example, there's a section in there about Fanny Hill.
Yes.
She goes to, I forget the name of the place, but I want to say that it's all tied into some sort of German opera.
Uh-huh.
Like I want to say like Tristan and Isolde or something.
That sounds right.
It's absolutely crazy. Oh yes, it does. It does tie into Tristan and Isolde because in the opera, if I'm not mistaken, Tristan. Part of the point of the whole story is that Tristan is like he goes to some fantasy heaven that's essentially like a porn palace or something like that.
Yeah.
It's it's much more nicely worded in the German Wagnerian
Right.
opera. But it's Kubla Khan Pleasure Dome kind of place. And that's the whole point of having the agent Fanny Hill go run through that. I mean, to have a fun little Alan Moore sex romp.
Right. Sex.
Because let's face it, he is insane and he's a crazy, dirty old man.
He is a crazy, dirty old man, and I say that with love because, I mean, it's the start of this phase of his career and his life. Like with the Black Dossier, I think it's coming out. I think Lost Girls, the big top shelf editions, coming out around this time.
Yeah.
Also, which is complete porn. It's pornography. That's his own admission. That's not me making that up.
Right.
It's the beginning of his absolute, it seems, mission to make comics truly adult.
Yes.
To not only satisfy his own need and ego, it seems, but also to just seem to be labor to prove a point.
Yeah, absolutely. And in that sense, it actually is a little bit kind of pornographic.
Yeah. Well, you've got the introduction of Orlando.
Yeah. I was stunned by this whole book. He takes a moment to create a fake Shakespearean script, which is extremely vulgar.
Yes.
And he actually does it with quite a plum.
Yeah.
He really does pull it off. It would be fine. It is, as I said, vulgar, but it's funny and it's done well.
Which is of course a really great homage to sort of the essence, I think, of a lot of Shakespeare.
Yeah, absolutely. That only a couple of, I think, in an adult setting, it's recognized in the literary world, but obviously when we're teaching Shakespeare to our kids, it's one of those things where you're like, just kind of dancing around this idea.
Yes, absolutely. So hanging on, so we get this basically impenetrable tome that has so much information. It would take, still to this day, I have to go back and look and see what I might have missed, because he has, of course, used it as a reference guide to future stories, which I don't know if that was truly the intention at the time. Of course, it makes him sound like a genius if it does, but who's to know? Because as we well know, his ego is well stroked.
Exactly.
And
you just feel comfortable knowing that he probably couldn't see the 3D that well.
Yeah. Well, he was high enough that he didn't really, you know.
Everything is blue.
Right. He's got, you know, for you know, for the kids, you know, he has the hydroponic children. I don't know what he's growing up there in Northampton, but I am sure it is. I believe there was an interview I read a few years ago. I think you read it too. Where it's just like he smokes at least like 3 of these massive spliffs a day.
Yeah. Like he doesn't smoke cigarettes anymore. To his credit, he's said that.
Yeah. You know? He's replaced it with this giant spliffs.
He has. Yeah. You
know, it's a good job if you can take it. So we have this massive volume, and by the way, most of the criticisms too I've read online from different types of people who've read it. Everyone's basically in agreement about the Black Dossier, about that denseness, and sort of about it's just too much. Like it's too much. It should have really been broken up to be a little bit more palatable and digestible. So it's strange then, because speaking of German Wagnerian opera, that brings us fast forward to the first set of the Century books.
Yes.
And that's 1910.
Yeah.
Which is basically, from my understanding in multiple readings over the last few years, and sort of trying to look up some of the annotations, I mean, it's basically a Bertolt Brecht homage.
Yes, man.
So go ahead. What were your feelings on 1910?
Man, you know, it sucked. All 3 of those books just suck.
Okay, so this is let me run through them real quick for everyone. It was
fun to learn a little bit about the song "Mac the Knife" and its history.
Right.
That was great. Okay. And then it was great. It was a great setup to introduce a fantastic character.
Yes.
You know, who's going to be amazing. But let's face it, also she's kind of, you know, Nemo Jr.
Nemo Jr. Yeah.
So, like, I loved Nemo. I couldn't get enough of Nemo. You know, so the idea that we're bringing him back in, he was absent, I believe, throughout Black Dossier.
Yes, he was. He was completely absent. That's correct.
Sadly missed. I will say that I actually really enjoyed his solution to the ending of Black Dossier, even though the 3D didn't work for me, but I did enjoy it. But to lead into this was a pretty big letdown.
Yeah.
You know, references aside, I'm glad that he had fun, because I'm sure that he did have fun. You know.
Yeah.
But going into a like super H.P. Lovecraft based storyline.
Yeah.
Which, frankly, and I'm gonna, you know what? I'm gonna enjoy saying this. Frankly, Grant Morrison had done 15 years before in The Invisibles. It was just old. It was tired. You know, it's like, I get it, Alan Moore. You like H.P. Lovecraft. Good for you, man. Let it go.
Right, because for people who might not know, you know, simultaneously he's doing all this like Neonomicon books for Avatar, and
it was just another pornographic romp.
Right, which all tied up into H.P. Lovecraft, though.
Right, exactly.
And really gross. I just want to point that out for people. Neonomicon is really, really fucking gross.
Horribly disgusting. Horribly disgusting on multiple levels. You know, I still don't understand exactly what he was going for.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's just bad.
Yeah.
That bad.
and so, you know, we get 1910, which, you know, has an interesting ending, at least to me, where the rape happens again.
Again.
Again, he was brought to task recently about his use of rape, and he handled it with anger, which I thought, I was like, well, you do write a lot about rape, man. Like, yeah. I'm sorry that someone pointed it out. I mean, even though Janie, Nemo's daughter, has like the best, like that. I'm gonna say, man, I did like the ending of 1910 because she becomes the person she's going to become, that she's sort of meant to become. Unfortunately, yes. It's because she gets raped. Yes. And her solution is very Nemo-esque. Yeah. And that aspect of it I enjoyed, but unfortunately, they plant the seed for all of this Moonchild, Moonstone thing that leads us to the next book, the 1969 book.
Yes.
Which I still don't get. I don't get it. I don't understand it. It just seems like it's a complete waste.
Yes. If I'm not mistaken, 1969 begins with two men having sex in a bath.
Yes, you're correct. Yes.
And I don't, honestly, I don't care about the fact that it's two men. I don't care if it was two women. I don't care if it was a straight couple or what the situation is. It just wasn't proper. And I hate using that word, but I mean, like, it was just that for that.
It was gratuitous. In fact, I remember my first conversation with you about it after reading it right when it came out. That was my first words. I said, there's this really gratuitous blowjob scene at the beginning, and my only feeling walking away from it is just like, because I can. It has nothing to do with the scene. It really has nothing to do with setting up.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It has nothing to do with that. And again,
let me clarify too. I'm with you. This has nothing to do with homosexuality. It could have been any. It was just the fact that it was gratuitous sex.
Right.
That had no context.
Right. Exactly. Where is it in this story? Where is this story? What is this story?
Yeah. It's one of the most meandering middle chapters of anything I've ever read.
Yeah.
I thought going into it, my high expectations for this chapter was that he's finally going to get to do what he's probably always wanted to do, and do a book about counterculture pop art.
Right.
And the art's there, but the story just isn't.
Yeah, I 100% agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, with that. Love the Sergeant Pepper's look going on, but man, oh man, that was such a letdown.
But again, the end of the book is great because you have the wonderful scene in the 1970s.
Exactly.
It's the punk rock scene, and it was the only redeeming thing. Why? What is? Now that I'm thinking about it, I'm starting to see it's just like, boy, the end of these books, the last 2 pages, while not worth the price,
right,
they're great moments.
Oh yeah, they're fantastic. They're fantastic.
I hate to get all the way through it to get to that payoff.
Right.
Which leads to the final volume, 2009.
Yeah.
What I have a couple thoughts on it. What were yours?
I kind of feel like I can spoil this.
Go ahead.
The payoff wasn't worth it. The joke inside of it is pretty funny.
Yeah.
Of the identity of the Antichrist.
Yes.
Obviously, that's hilarious. At the same point in time, it kind of feels like a rip on at something that that actually is kind of cool. You
Yeah.
know? So in a way, it just makes Alan Moore seem a little bit jealous and petty. Um,
Yes.
he's like he takes a swipe at J.K. Rowling essentially.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. For,
uh,
for, for those of you who don't know, um, and this is all over the internet, so I really don't feel that bad about it. The Antichrist is Harry Potter. And I thought that if
although not officially, Jeff, it's not.
no, you're right. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
I mean, if it was Harry Potter, that would be infringement.
Yes, and God knows he doesn't infringe.
Exactly. Exactly. He
Yeah.
satirized.
He satirizes. That's right, but he'll criticize others for the infringement.
Hell yeah, he will.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
So yeah, that was fun. A little bit of a swipe at her, and not nearly worth having gone through the first 2 issues of Century.
Yeah.
The first 2 books, 1969 is a slog, man.
Yeah, it's really hard to get through.
I mean, is it? And that sucks. Like the Black Dossier is hard to get through, but it's got its parts to it where you're like, it's a puzzle.
Right. It's at least interstitial enough. Like there's another segment to go on to, or actually the way the dossier is created, you can jump around.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And it's funny. I commend you for bringing up that point earlier about complaints about it being too dense, and then it turns around and comes out with 1910 and Century just is not dense at all. There's nothing there. It's so empty and vapid. The things that come out of Century are Nemo's daughter.
Yeah.
And the guy who's traveling through 4-dimensional time.
Yes, yes. That's worth mentioning.
Exactly.
One of his friends, the writer, I think it's Ian something, had written those stories about. He's like the Prisoner of London or something like that.
Right. That's a great idea. That's fun.
Yeah.
It makes me want to look into the idea of the Prisoner of London idea, but also at the same point in time, I can wag a finger at Alan Moore and say, hey, you used that device before in From Hell.
Yep.
When you had because there's a story in From Hell about there's a moment in From Hell where the killer is chasing the victim, and for a moment he looks through a window and sees a guy who's watching his television. And the guy gets up from his chair and peers out the window. And that's because there is a guy who lives on the same alley in the 1950s and insists that he sees the ghosts of the Ripper and his victim being chased down the alleyway.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
So the idea of the Prisoner of London, Alan Moore's played with before. Here he just takes a lot longer to really stretch his legs inside of the idea.
Yeah, and I agree with you too. I think 2009 comes off as sour grapes.
Yeah.
In general, about pop culture, somewhere that he's grumbled about, and when you talk about Alan Moore these days, you have to sort of weigh the two arguments of, can you blame him for having sour grapes because the only questions he ever gets are about Watchmen?
No kidding.
Or, is that just some sort of, weird defense mechanism where he can just have an excuse to be a cratchy old, bastard, and wave his fist around? So I think that it's hard because when you have something like 2009, it's so media and culture's out of control and it's not genuine, and it's just like, well, that's always sort of been what you say. How can you dismiss that? how you've often defended art, even pop art. Even the wonderful the issue of Promethea with the or a couple of issues of Promethea where he does the alternate covers, and one of them's the 1960s cover, the Yellow Submarine cover, and
Yes.
all this is just like, I'm sorry, but Yellow Submarine's not that great. And I'm kind of not into the whole idea that the pop art movement of that time period was altogether that brilliant.
Yeah. It certainly has its place inside of art history, and that's great that Alan Moore was around for that back in the '60s. I'm glad for him for that, but it's just a very new world.
Yeah.
He doesn't like email. He doesn't like the internet. He is completely out of touch with the world, with the modern world.
Right, which is weird because he's going online to do comics now.
I did not know that.
Okay, there was an announcement about a month ago, and y'all can look this up. Also, people who listen to this, he is starting a line of online comic strips.
Wow.
Yeah, so he is making strides, but it seems like too little, too late.
Way too late. Yeah, and I'm gonna guess that it's pretty little.
Yeah. Well, that will of course be determined to see. All right. Well, we're pretty much running over. We're a little bit out of time here tonight, man. I don't want to get into the Nemo books because we still have another volume of those to go.
Yeah.
So I don't want to get into that. Really tonight I wanted to sort of bring everyone up to speed and sort of talk our way through, because Century did just get released. It's a really beautiful edition of it, even though if you and I don't really care. I will say this: it's Top Shelf has done a really good job in putting it together. I saw this edition. This is the European edition. The American edition I saw in the store the last week, and I picked it up and flipped through it. It's really gorgeous. Regardless of my problems with Century, I have no problems with Kevin O'Neill.
Absolutely.
He's just, his art's just always so good, so top notch. It really does take it to another level. Can you hang out for a second, man, while I wrap things up? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay, great. All right. That's tonight's show, folks. It was on the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, sort of our appreciation and tearing apart of it. And even though there towards the end it sounds like, why the hell did we ever bother to read it? I do love it, and I know that Heath loves it too. So thanks for joining in. You can, of course, share this show via Google Plus or YouTube. This show gets recorded and immediately uploaded. You can follow me on Twitter at JLDPROD2002, where I encourage you to, if you don't follow me, that's fine, but try to comment on the Twitter question this week I have, which is, what is your favorite League of Extraordinary Gentlemen moment? Make sure you do hashtag after Wednesday so that we can follow the conversation and respond to you in kind. And I'd like to thank my oldest friend, my oldest comic colleague, my brother, Mr. Michael Heath Pecorino, for joining me to talk about all things Alan Moore in the League. I thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. It's a pleasure. I wish we could have spoken about Kevin O'Neill more. He's amazing.
Yeah, well, we'll do a whole other show on that, because I think we need to talk about martial law. We have to talk about all of those things. So we'll save that up for a Kevin O'Neill extravaganza. But hang out on the line just for a minute, man. So to everybody else, though, I thank you so much. And until next time, we will see you next week.